Welcome to the Fourth Step Podcast. On each episode, we interview recovering addicts and learn their story with addiction. Through exploring personal journeys, we get a glimpse of the depths addicts fall to and their path in recovery. We hope you enjoy the episode. All right. Well, welcome to the Fourth Step Podcast. My name is Kevin, and I am an addict.
Hey, Kevin.
Hi.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi. And today we have a special guest co-host, and that's J-Dub.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, and I'm an addict.
Hey, Jennifer.
Welcome back, Jennifer.
Thanks. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Josh couldn't make it today, so we do have a fill-in co-host. And our guest today is...
Hi, everybody. My name's Dan T. I'm an addict.
Hello, Dan.
Hi.
How are you feeling?
Curious, anxious, comfortable.
Comfortable. I like that.
Me too.
Maybe a little nervous. And not so much about the setting, but about what I might be willing to say.
Yeah, the content. So, in honor of Josh, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being really good, 1 being not so good.
Oh, you know, I got to go with, I'm hovering around an 8. I'm in a pretty good space today.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, for
I like
me,
it.
that would be really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good for you.
For sure.
All right. So, we just had some updates to our software that Cousin John did. And so he did an amazing job getting a bunch of stuff straightened out for us. So I'm happy about that.
Way to go, John.
New and improved.
Yes.
Let's get it on, John.
All right.
Yeah. And also, this is the last episode of season 1. So it's very special that you're here because you're near and dear to our hearts.
Ending it with a banger.
Yeah. A banger.
I couldn't help myself.
Yeah.
I just went all kind of visual there, Jen.
Yeah,
I just went all
welcome.
kind of visual.
All right. So, first off, what's your clean date?
January 11th, 1990.
Yeah. That's a long time.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like forever, and sometimes it seems like yesterday. I think that's probably a pretty common experience for us.
1990. So you have
I'm 2 weeks shy of 35 years, so I have 34 years.
2 weeks shy. So, yeah, no fronts, but I don't see you getting loaded in the next 2 weeks.
I'm feeling pretty good about my
Your
clean
chances?
time.
We're good. Yeah, I think you're
I'm
okay.
feeling pretty good about my clean time.
That's cool.
The more I chit-chat, the more I'm comfortable here doing this.
Good.
Nice.
Most of the time we jump right into childhood and a lot of stuff that we try to correlate from childhood to the actual choice of getting loaded is the trauma that we suffered. And it's not everybody's case. Some people had an amazing childhood, but still ended up an addict.
Sure.
So what was that like for you? Do you have memories of trauma?
Well, the step work I've done have unearthed some things, right? That I didn't know were challenges at the time, and for a long time in recovery, I didn't know were challenges because I carried around a lot of guilt of what I put my family through. So even what felt like pointing a finger at them just seemed out of bounds.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, there was some sexual abuse that took place, not from family members, but there was also no types of abuse whatsoever, physically or loud yelling or anything like that. But my parents were raised from a generation that didn't know about nurturing. They didn't have any idea what nurturing was, what it was like. And so, as I look back at all the work I've done through the steps and through outside help, I've been able to kind of put my finger on some childhood experiences or just the way my brain developed that created my reality. A lot of times still, here and now.
There's over the years of lots of different types of therapy, there's kind of like an underlying thing that a lot of people don't know about in those households where there's no emotion and no nurturing. It is a form of child abuse, and not in a direct, intentional manner, but I think it borderlines on neglect of nurturing.
Yeah, I would agree.
That's the way it was explained to me.
I would agree. And I think being able to acknowledge that my parents, my mom dad was they were raised by German parents in the Depression. and what kind of nurturing environment were they brought up with? So I understand that they were doing the best they could, but there were a lot of really dysfunctional things that I've actually just this past month have had to really connect with my higher power and connect with my higher self and the person that I want to be, to step away from those household behaviors that were so ingrained.
What can you give us an example?
Yeah. So the family tradition in my home was when someone made you angry, you withheld love.
Common.
There was the silent treatment that, if you really cared, you'd know why I'm pissed. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to vocalize it. There's just going to be an angry energy in the household. And so, yeah. And now, recently I've had a couple of experiences in my life that were really challenging. And I'm trying to find a way to walk a line between protecting myself, which I have a tendency to kind of turtle up, if I feel hurt because I've heard something a certain way, which happens all the time. If somebody says something and I hear something completely different than what they said, and I respond very personally to it, and so I turtle up. And so walking that tightrope between turtling up and not withholding love or punishing people out of being a disappearing Dan has been really interesting, and I feel really pretty successful at it. So I'm really, there's an underlying level of thankfulness for the set process and the relationship I have with a higher power that took many years to develop, that I've been able to see myself grow.
Nice. So when you say you turtle up, does that match what you experienced as a kid? I mean, that's something that you learned in your childhood, right? To withhold love?
Oh.
If you're angry?
Yeah, I think...
or any other emotion?
Well, my response to it would be to try to drag it out, right? When love was being withheld, I really, really wanted to be special, be funny, be whatever it was to get it back. And that has also, in the last 4-step I did, there was a lot of underlying stuff that kind of surprised me, that there was still an element of approval seeking that I carry around with me. It was really hard to look at because I thought I was so much more recovered than that, So
Don't we all sometimes?
Right.
Yeah.
For real, yeah.
Right.
Well, do you think too that, because that silent treatment, when you talk about that, like all of a sudden I was like, ugh, because like that's what I used to get. It was very conditional. If I do everything that you do, if I do A, B, C, D, E, then you'll love me. But if not, then you're going to go away, withhold, be silent, and not. And I think it's really common, actually, more common than I think sometimes we're willing to admit when we really think about it, how, well, I didn't come from this home I didn't have that, same thing, I didn't have the physical thing, I didn't have all of that other stuff.
The abuse, you mean?
Huh? Abuse, yeah.
Yeah.
The neglect was more about my emotional well-being, and being emotionally balanced, or having some sort of ability to regulate. And I didn't. It was either one way or the other. So it was very black and white. So shocking that I still think in black and white, even today, but that silent treatment one that you're talking about, man, it's a big thing for me. Like, don't, and then I want to beat you up until you tell me what's wrong, and then I get my feelings hurt because you get mad at me. You meaning anybody that is doing that, and then all of a sudden I'm the victim.
That's a vicious cycle.
It's such a cycle, and I see it and I know it today. But man, when in the thick of it, before I did a lot of work on that, it really did affect my adult life way more. I was surprised how much that affected my adult life.
So
me too.
Can you see, looking back at your childhood and all the work that you've done so far, look back and see that type of abuse, it's just like, when I say abuse, I say it without like a blame attached to it. Mm-hmm. It was just circumstances that happened to us. Do you look back and see that you had that type of abuse as in your childhood?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people from my generation experienced that. So I don't think by any means, I think the weird thing is sometimes seeing it in myself, whatever flaw I might have,
your character defect?
Yeah, whatever character defect that might come up, that's based in self. I have a tendency to, overblow. And, as I look back on my childhood, there were a lot of things. My dad was in the military during multiple wars. He was gone. He would leave for years at a time.
Yeah.
And, everybody else had a dad. And everybody else in the military, when their dads left, they took them with them. But my dad didn't.
Oh, when he was deployed?
Yeah, I didn't realize it. Well, because, you grow up in base housing and people say, oh, my dad got stationed so-and-so, we're all leaving. And then for me, it'd be like, oh, my dad got stationed somewhere and he left us here.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize he was going into active war zones. How are you going to recognize that when you're 8 years old?
True.
It was just dad was gone.
So, yeah, it's okay. Okay. So that's popping right into resentment.
At you.
Oh. You ask these damn questions, Kevin.
Yeah. Look, can you see my eyes just flushing with tears?
I can.
Yeah. So, I mean, I warned you. We dig deep.
No, I'm safe. And I think that's why I'm okay to talk about it. I'm okay to tear up like this.
Yeah. In fact, to be honest with you, the more episodes we do and the more vulnerable people get, the more reaction we get from listeners about how much it really helped them when people are authentic. So I hope you feel okay about doing that.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's just, I touched on that very lightly in step work before, just very lightly, just kind of touched it. Just, how sometimes you see something, you just tap it.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, that's there. I acknowledge that's there, and then just like, okay, move on to something else. And you don't recognize the wound.
Uh-huh.
And you don't recognize the gift from the wound either.
Yeah. So there's a saying, if you don't heal the wounds that hurt you, you will bleed on the people that did not cut you.
Love it.
Yeah. And so, so that's kind of the therapeutic part of that, working on our whatever childhood stuff we have, or even in adulthood, we get that stuff too.
Yeah. And I think for me, part of the healing is that's, God enters through the open spaces, right? That when we're wounded and we've got those deep open spaces, that's an opportunity sometimes the only opportunity for a higher power to really kind of manifest and comfort and calm and give some direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my sponsor, y'all used to always tell me, like, it didn't matter what relationship we're talking about, just relationships in general. She's like, if you're in a relationship that is having dysfunction in it and you're not doing any work on yourself and you step out of the relationship, you're just going to recreate the same thing over and over again. So you're better off to work on it here. I mean, I didn't always listen to her, but, I'm just saying.
Really?
But,
what a
are you shocked to hear that?
What a surprise, Jacob.
But today, I see that, right? Hindsight's always 20/20. Like, I see that version of you just bleed on the next person until you heal the wound that really didn't have anything to do with the person the relationship, no matter what it was. It could be my kids, it could be my ex-husband, it could be, a friend, it could be whatever. But yeah, it's an interesting concept that went over my head for a long time. Yeah. Because it was your fault.
So the second part of that question about like childhood trauma or abuse is, do you have a correlation of how it affects relationships today? I mean, you talked about it, about like withholding love. Is there any other parts of that affect your relationships?
I think that's really so prevalent and such a big piece of it that it's hard to see anything else when I'm talking about that. It's like, that's the tradition. That's the cycle that has to be broken.
Yeah.
I've been married for a long time, and my wife's family is very different. As they will elevate and they will escalate vocally, and they will, they want to solve it, and they want to solve it, differently. And the more that happens, the more I withdraw. And I also recognize that I was always the smallest kid as a child.
Me too.
Like the smallest. And being popular and being accepted and being loved was about survival. And many years after I no longer needed that survival skill, I did not know how to let go of it.
We still hold on to humor. Yeah?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Humor. It's interesting, to be able to kind of step outside of oneself and say, I recognized from a very early age that I was cute. It wasn't something that was a secret to me. I knew that I was attractive. Girls used to chase me around I think it was the second grade to try to kiss me, and I would have to run from them.
Gross.
Gross.
Yeah,
Disgusting.
it was
Jeez.
gross, but the level of attention, there was a certain addictive aspect to it. But also, nobody wanted to beat up on the guy that all the girls loved.
Yeah.
I never even thought about that.
So, yeah, that's interesting. When you were growing up, did you carry that? I know I did. I'm saying this from my own experience of being the shortest kid in class for a lot of years. That we're different from others.
Oh yeah,
and that we have to overcompensate just to make up for our height.
Yeah, absolutely. And I I can only, I think it's like a spiritual Mount Everest for me to still get completely over that.
Yeah.
It's still for me to completely get over that because, there'll be times when it's like, I'm still there. There are times I'm still there.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying, and I can relate to that. There's a part of the 4-step one that talks about having that bias of people that aren't like us. And do you carry that too? People aren't like us, like you and me, the short kids, our entire life.
I don't know if I looked at it. I guess it's the same thing as I'm different versus people aren't like us.
Yeah.
So I just have always been so centered in self. I don't look at it's more about me being different than them being different.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. I resorted to, because I have 2 older brothers and it was a violent household, I resorted to always being the most threatening person. Even though I'm the shortest, I will cause you the most harm. So trauma, you just mentioned quickly about sexual childhood trauma.
Yeah. So, and
you're not alone.
I know. I can talk about. It wasn't, and I don't want to minimize it because it was what it was. Is that we were being watched by a family that was very close to my parents when I was young, and the middle child, crawled into my bed and said, "Hey, we're going to play a game, and I'm going to F you." And I didn't know what he was talking about. And he tried very hard. I was just too small. And then I think the really weird part about it was, or I guess it's all, and looking back, I recognized that ran rampant in his family. His older sister did the same thing to me. Right. So it's like, it might be a little bit of an issue, but when the whole family's doing it. But then he said, he started calling me names and shamed me for my part, which was basically just being there and being adorable,
Yeah.
or being the little kid, whether I was adorable or not. And so he called me names, faggot, queer, names I didn't understand, and laughed at me. And then, this was like the guy that I looked up to. This is the guy that had go-karts and stuff like that. And so and he's like, you can't tell anybody. And so I just remember being at the breakfast table. I was very young. I was really young and just being so incredibly confused.
Confused. That's exactly right. Yeah, I can relate to that. Looking back, did you see any connection to all that childhood stuff? To the minute that you started getting loaded?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the easiest connection to make is when I first started actually using in a way that I think launched me into what we might call an addict subculture. I was in 7th grade and a couple of guys, I'll just throw their first names out there, Willie and Tommy, said, "Hey, we're going to go behind the English department. We're going to smoke a joint." And inside, everything in me screamed, "Don't do that. You've been taught your whole life that that's bad. Dope is for dopes. This is reefer madness. Don't do that." So everything in my intuition said no, but Tommy and Willie were asking me to go do it with them. And so for the first time, that created a lifelong pattern was I violated my own gut and my own intuition to fit in with these guys to be safe.
So your morals took a back seat.
My morals, and it changed so much too, because my life. I mean, sure, I had secrets from my parents as a little kid. Certain things I tried to get away with that I didn't tell them. But at that point, or very shortly after, my whole existence became a secret. And that's what I mean when I say the addict subculture is that secret life that we live and we try to hide and stay out of, stay in the shadows where we could get high safely,
Yeah, I do. I was curious, do you have any guilt about all that childhood stuff growing up? That, we established that did it lead you to using drugs, or did you find drugs and felt that it took away all that pain?
No, the pain was still there. The insecurities were still there. I think, and I guess it really depends when I think about it, what chemical, right?
Yeah.
I would still have insecurities or big time. Sometimes they would be blown up even bigger when I smoked pot, but throw a little alcohol in that mix. And
you just didn't care?
Then I was the funniest, coolest motherfucker.
Zero fucks given.
Yeah,
that's what I say.
What I mean? It was like, and I started drinking alcohol well before I was 11, but I didn't have access to it.
On the daily?
On the daily.
Yeah. So was that all the shame and guilt that you had coming into getting loaded?
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, and I don't really recognize a shame-based childhood by any means. I think there was an element of not fitting in, an element of being insecure around my size, an element of...
Did anybody in your childhood say, you're never going to make it, you're not, you don't deserve this, or you're the problem?
No, I don't.
So there was no shaming you.
No. I think I excelled in school when I was very young. I was a part of this thing called MGM gift program, mentally gifted minors, and I think a lot of that I wanted to show off. I wanted to, receive the attention and the love, but I think at some level in my home that was expected.
Wow,
it wasn't reward. It was expected. You were supposed to get A's.
Huh.
There was no, let's throw a party for Dan. He did so well. It was like, yeah, that's what he's supposed to do.
Did exactly what you're supposed to do.
Yeah,
there was no parade at my house. For
that's a high bar to live up to.
Yeah.
Did you get punished or anything if you didn't?
No. Well, I remember I struggled in math. I was excelled in everything else, but I struggled in math, and my teacher, I think this was 6th grade, called my mom, and I could almost feel her embarrassment. It was almost like I was a reflection of her ability as a parent, and so I could feel. And I got the lecture of, you can do better. What is, you need to focus. There was no, how can we help?
Yeah.
It was.
That sounds a little bit like shaming.
Yeah. So I guess there was an element of that.
Okay. Cool. So what was the first drug you did, and how old were you?
Well, my favorite uncle was a bartender, and
So
my parents
alcohol.
used to have big parties, and I would be the bartender at, 7 years old.
Dude, I can so relate.
I got to serve the drinks, and I would take shots, and if I was a little squirrely late at night, my mom would give me a glass of wine. So, alcohol was a part of my family's culture in a big way.
Yeah.
And then the first time I smoked weed, I mentioned I was in 7th grade. I got to school. I was always a grade ahead, so I was younger than everybody else.
You're a little smarty pants.
Yeah, I think all those years of chemicals kind of diminished that a bit.
Go do a little math.
But yeah, exactly. And then, the progression was alcohol, weed, and I was also tried to excel in sports, and I was pretty good as a wrestler. And it's interesting, and this happened a little bit later as I got out of 8th grade and went into 9th grade, as I discovered cross tops.
Double dose cross tops?
Double dose cross tops, man. Remember the tingling head and the how empowered I felt. Remember?
Yeah.
Did you ever do cross tops? Jen, are you old enough?
Speed.
Unfortunately, I am old enough.
Yeah. And then I still remember the first time I was like, man, the sensation that I chased into the depths of addiction was one of that perfect combination of weed, alcohol, and uppers. Mm-hmm. I was like arrived. I had the buzzing feeling, the awareness of the speed, the calm, a little bit of calmness from the weed, and then the fearlessness of the alcohol all mixed in together. And it was like, I want to feel like this for the rest of my life. And that was the beginning of a long descent, sometimes quicker, sometimes slower. But, as we pick up speed in our addiction, the hill got steeper.
Do you still have any of the destructive habits today that you did when you were in your depths? Like, that's a tough one. You'd have to actually look back to your using. I mean, I had a using career of like 4 years, and it was enough to get me from, like beers to looking at prison time.
Yeah. I mean, I think I worked really hard over the last couple of years. I think I've worked very consistent. JW and I, we go way back. We're 32 years, something like that. Yeah. And one thing we've always had is we've always worked steps.
Yeah.
And I've always done my very best with what I might have at any given time to strive to grow spiritually. And I think for a long time, like many men, I struggled with porn. And I haven't done porn in years. I haven't smoked cigarettes in years. I haven't used drugs in years. So the real spiritually devastating or physically challenging fixes are behind me. Do I shop every once in a while? Very minimally. I wouldn't say it's ever become well, I do have 13 pair of Adidas Superstars. I was just
going to call you out on your shoes.
I do have 13 pair of Adidas Superstars. And then
one wasn't enough?
No, one wasn't enough.
Colors, Kevin.
That's right.
Oh, colors.
Lucky 13 and about 46 watches, I think.
And glasses.
Yeah, but I haven't replaced my glasses. I'm making progress, Jen. I'm making progress.
I'm just teasing you.
I think there's the addict tendencies, but in terms of destructive, shame-based stuff, I feel really free from that, and I have for quite a while.
Yeah, I was going to say, so your impulses have found a different space, right? And it's, for a lot of us, that's harmless up until a point.
Yeah.
Until it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I look at it now, I've also, got a mood disorder, mental health challenges, and I might be a little bit more prone to go down that rabbit hole or suffer from depression. It's interesting to think that that I go to something destructive for me for comfort. Mm-hmm. And I think that's pretty commonality with a lot of addicts.
It is.
I find comfort in things that are destructive. And now that so many of those things are removed, I really don't know where to go with the discomfort. And I try to go to God with it, and I share about it, and I do a lot of things, but sometimes it might be just a little more than my little Dan can handle or whatever. And I still, go into isolation, really dark places sometimes.
I totally relate to that on a different level. I think Jen and I had conversations about this, like those that grow up in chaos, when they get clean, they're still comfortable. Even though that's an oxymoron, comfortable in chaos. Mm-hmm. Is that an oxymoron or just weird?
No,
I don't know what it is.
It makes perfect sense to us.
Yeah. That we're very comfortable with just shit breaking around us, our lives. It's just, that's what we know. And it takes a lot of effort to change that pattern. And usually there's a crisis that happens to change that. But you didn't grow up in chaos. And so it sounds like you just have a different way of attacking that part of, you didn't have dysfunction, but right now the mental illness that we all have, right? And the depression, and that's not typically where we go, a lot of us, but you kind of have a different lane, I should say.
Yeah, and sometimes, I mean, the good news is I've also, as I look at my progression in recovery, both spiritually and from the addictive behaviors, as my recovery in terms of mental health has been gradual as well. There used to be times when I would have to go on disability from work for like 6 months. It was so dangerously bad. And now, every once in a while, I might miss a day.
Yeah.
So I've learned a lot more coping skills. I've learned a lot more about body, mind, spirit. But at the end of the day, and sometimes there are external experiences that do that. Sometimes I just get maybe lazy in my habits of doing things that keep me at a distance from the depression. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it might just be purely chemical. What I'm working with the professionals now is inventorying the things that I might stop doing that would put me in a position to be really depressed. Because it's easy for me to do. I do a daily inventory. I write every morning. I pray every morning. I've got a pretty strong spiritual practice. But typically I'm writing the things that I did that I wish I hadn't done. I'm not always looking at the things I haven't done that are simple life things that I need to be doing, like exercise, good nutrition, reaching out. Those are the main things. When I will slowly stop, I will think, I should call JW or I should call Kevin. And then I just go, fuck them. You know what I mean? And I don't call anybody.
And not in a derogatory way.
No, just like, it could be anybody. It could be Jesus Christ. And I'd be like, I'm talking to him. You know what I mean?
I do. I know exactly what you mean. So when you first got clean, what resentments did you have at that time?
Well, I don't know that I really...
Did you have resentments about your childhood?
No, not at that time. I didn't see them. I didn't see them.
So what about after, when you did some work? When you did see them?
Much, much later in my recovery.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it was more in therapy. Again, when I would do my step work, my parents, I know they did their very best. I mean, they valued literacy. There were some good moments growing up, man. I still am so thankful. I can remember laying on my dad's bed, me on one side, my dad in the middle, my brother on the other, and he would read Call of the Wild to us and Treasure Island, Tom Sawyer, and all of the things I put them through. If there was resentment, it was at me, but I wasn't able to see that. And I found my first fourth step in my garage a few years ago. And it was fucking hilarious, man.
You kept it?
I kept it. I think I finally got rid of it.
I still have mine.
But I kept it. I got a resentment from a guy who fronted me like an ounce of dope and wanted me to pay him back.
How dare he?
I know. He knew who I was, man. He knew he wasn't getting no money from me, but he was so pissed. And I was like, dude... It was kind of like that old thing about, the scorpion gets on the back of the whatever. Yeah. You knew my nature, bro.
And I just want to say something really quick because you were telling that story about your dad. So just so the listeners know, like when I was newly clean, I would show up randomly at Dana Ruth's house in a mess, usually over a boy. Something bad happened. But I used to go to this book study with Ruth, but I'd always be over there and you would read us Forrest Gump. You read us Forrest Gump before it was a movie.
That's right.
And so you're carrying on some really cool stuff. I mean, outside of the resentments that we talk about, like the joy of I think friendships and relationships in recovery is that like I hear that story and I think to myself, man, I remember when I had like a year clean and I was sitting on your couch in your little apartment and you even did the Forrest Gump. You did a Forrest Gump voice better than Tom Hanks because it's the first knowledge, the first thing I had of that. And I had never, I never had anybody in my life, outside of like my mom that used to do that when I was little. So anyways, I just wanted to share that really cool memory.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful. And so writing about my parents just seemed, I couldn't see that angle of abuse that we can see now, where it wasn't, there's no bitterness attached to it at all.
Yeah. And that type, a lot of people say it's like non-directional, non-intentional. Mm-hmm. And, it wasn't at you. It was just the way that they were raised, and I see it with my parents too. I don't hold that resentment anymore, even though I was like, like beat, physically abused, emotionally abused, all that stuff. I look at them now and I'm like, hey, if I went through their childhood, I probably might have been more fucked up than them, you know?
No doubt.
Because their childhood was bad.
It was a mess.
No doubt.
So-
turns out my namesake, my dad's dad, his name was Daniel.
Yeah.
He was a bipolar alcoholic.
Yeah.
Who knew? Right.
So your grandfather.
My dad's dad.
So, yeah.
I'm my dad's dad, basically.
Yeah. We carried on the tradition.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, you got to carry the torch somehow, right?
Yeah, I think the beauty of it is in all recognition is part of I was telling you guys I had a really nostalgic, wonderful drive up the hill here was recognizing how the cycle has kind of been broken in a big way, especially with my grandchildren, my oldest
Nice.
grandchild, the level of thoughtfulness she brings to the world didn't live in my house.
Yeah, but it gets to live in your house now with you, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we broke the cycle.
Big time.
Yeah.
My youngest granddaughter,
She's a crapshoot.
yeah, the jury's still out on where she's gonna go, but that's all right. She's 11. She gets to be there. You know?
She's a spitfire, though.
She
Nice.
is.
You know, my dad, and you reminded me of this after my dad passed away, I found a whole bunch of stuff in an old briefcase that was his report cards. And on the report cards, the parents could write stuff back. And his dad used to write things about, we're so disappointed in Bill. He can do so much better, yada, yada, yada.
Wow.
And I think about that. And, my dad was an alcoholic and he kind of had to live through that whole trauma of having very strict, but also, I would probably say shaming parents who had really high expectations and he didn't meet. And he was also like 17 years younger than his oldest sibling, or the oldest sibling, because he was like a change of life baby. So they were like basically like, we can't believe you're
That's
here.
a big gap.
It's a huge gap. And so I think about like if I had to live in that space after I read all that stuff about, because I thought my dad was a great guy, of course, but there were chunks of where my dad was absent and where I got to change some stuff and how that worked in my life with my kids. I don't know if I broke a cycle by any means, but I definitely feel like I changed the direction. But understanding my grandparents a little bit more just helps me make sense in recovery, where like I'm not mad at my parents anymore. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I'm so over that. And I was the opposite. I was really mad at him when I got clean, but I was young and
they threw you in a duct tape you and threw you in the back of a van and took you to treatment.
They did. And so I was really mad at them. But it's like really heartwarming to hear stories about like, we know that our parents did the best that we could. And just because I have trauma doesn't mean I have to sit in this place of resentment and anger. And we get to change it. You talked about your grandkids and my kids. And do you think that when you look at your life today, you could have seen things like that, like with your granddaughter and her thoughtfulness?
I think one of the most powerful experiences that takes place regularly in my life is that I did not know that I had the capacity to love this deeply. And on many levels. Sometimes it's usually with my grandchildren, but sometimes it's with other people too.
Yeah.
You know? It's a vulnerable place to be. And sometimes you don't.
Does that scare you?
Fuck yeah. Sometimes.
That being vulnerable?
Not anywhere near where it used to. I think I've.
Did you have experience before with as being vulnerable and having it used against you as a weapon? I'm asking because it happened to me a lot.
Yeah. No, I don't. I think I avoided vulnerability really, really, really well. Because I started using so young.
Yeah.
Right. And that the deceit, the walls, and it's about me and mine, and everybody else was a vehicle to get what I wanted. There was such a level that vulnerability didn't exist.
What about when you got clean?
When I got clean, I still needed to be somebody special just to be anybody at all. There was such a level of shame and guilt that I didn't know I was carrying around, and that those insecurities that drove me to fit in so badly that I had to share perfectly, and I had to, I had to be the model, and it wasn't until mental illness started to kind of creep into my life and put me in a position where my life was very, very seriously in danger. I was committed by my sponsor and my wife to the mental hospital when I was 7 years clean. And it wasn't until after that, when I started going to therapy and started to really talk about what was going on, was I able to really get vulnerable. Because before that, I was still trying to be somebody to please you.
Yeah, so you were constantly not being authentic?
That's correct. I would be truthful with my sponsor, and sometimes I would cry, but most of the time the tears were the pain I'd caused others.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you did just mention the shame and the guilt. So there was some, right?
Yeah, well, what I was referring to, Kev, was my behavior during active addiction.
Okay, good. So that clarifies that the moral compass changed for you.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. I remember doing my first fifth step and my sponsor lovingly helping me see what was underneath my part.
Yeah.
Because, when you do your first four step, it's like, what's your part? Well, it was more about what I was doing rather than what I was being.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And my sponsor helped me see what I was being.
Oh, that's cool. That's very cool.
I would roll on the ground. I actually would fall on the ground in his little bedroom, in his little 1-2 bed, whatever little house he had. And I would literally go, ugh! Because for the first time, I would see how it was me. It was me the whole fucking time. It's trippy, man.
Yeah. Was there any resentments after you've done like a couple rounds of steps that you noticed kept showing up? It took me a long time to catch on to the resentment of my parents, that raised me, that I could do enough work to get past that. Like, I don't resent them anymore. In fact, I have love and compassion for them.
Yeah. I think, as I look back on all the inventories I've done, there might have been a couple where the same people showed up for the same reason, and then they just kind of almost organically drifted off.
Yeah.
But also, I've been married for a long time.
Yeah.
And my wife makes every goddamn inventory. and it's not, and if she doesn't, maybe, I think that's just a human thing, right?
Sure.
Is that,
if she doesn't, does that mean that you like kind of came to terms with accepting her for where she's at?
well, maybe.
Or
That's a great
that
question.
you've done the work to like speak up and walk through that?
Well, and I think the funny thing is when I say that, the last time I did a fifth step with my sponsor, when I do a fourth step, I really just try to, if I think it, write it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I think it, write it. And a lot of time what comes out is they're not really qualified as resentments under the definition of the word, where I relive a level of anger over and over again. They're just little things that irritate me. So, but they go on my fourth step because I still am able to look at my still present but ever diminishing arrogance, my still present but ever diminishing self-righteousness, my still present but ever diminishing one-sided view of things, my still present but ever diminishing victim, all of those aspects of character. So I think I write it, so sometimes stuff that's not really resentful gets down there, and it's just about trying to find ways to get better.
I also think, too, and I'm going to ask you the question because it's something that I suffer from when we're talking about resentments. Like, do you make your four steps sometimes? Like, because I do.
Every single time.
Every single time. And I always think to myself, why would I, set myself up for this every single time, but I think constantly seeing my part in these situations, and then I, of course, then I'm mad at myself because I'm like, oh, how did I not see that?
Right.
And I also think too that one of the things about collecting some time in recovery and doing the work is that I get to this place where I'm like, these shame words, right? I should be doing better. I should be better off. I should be, and
that's so toxic.
And it's so dangerous, right? Because I'm not even allowing myself to be human. I'm freaking human, man. But seeing that, being able to like right size myself, like I'm not up here and I'm not down there, it's sometimes difficult because I think there's an air of being able to do something not better than anybody else, but like I was like with the experience that I have. So do you like kind of run into that when you're inventorying yourself of I could be or should be or how I always do the how did I get here? Well, it's like it's real clear in your writing, Jennifer,
Yeah.
Real clear.
No, that's another wonderful question. I think this last time, I don't live in the shame and guilt nearly as much. As a matter of fact, it's very minimal, if any. There's a really more so compassion and humility. Mm-hmm. It's like getting in touch with I see it and I'm a little surprised by it. And there might be a moment of, wow, fuck, really, Dan? You still have 4 resentments and the underlying factor is you didn't get the approval you were seeking. And then it pretty quickly goes to, that's okay. Thank you, God. And it almost immediately goes to a sense of an opportunity to heal and to continue to grow spiritually. And one of my favorite lines in all of our literature, it's just a 1-sentence line, and it's self-loathing and humility are incompatible and they cannot exist at the same time.
I'm glad you brought up humility. Because that's our best weapon. I feel that spiritual principle is our best weapon against getting loaded.
I would tend to agree.
Isn't there, and I'm not a book, I don't recite the book well, but isn't there somewhere in the basic text where it says like humility is important as food and water for addicts? Or you know which one I'm talking about, and you can probably recite it. But
humility is as important to staying clean as food and water is to staying alive.
Thank you. See, I knew it was close. I was close.
You nailed
it. It's our best weapon.
It is our best weapon. Yeah. I mean, and that's a strong statement when you hear it. You're like, oh, like
it is huge. It is. And I think it's underlying. There's a sense of that principle in every single step.
Well, an old timer in my first 5 years said that if you practiced humility at that crossroad decision of getting loaded and not getting loaded, you'll never get loaded. And only because humility will get you out of self, or it will help you accept you as you are, whatever circumstance you're in. So that is my favorite spiritual principle, because I thrived on ego when I got clean or getting loaded.
And it takes getting loaded pretty much off the table. Yeah, you're right at that point, because it's like you can't live in the same. I love that.
Well, I think I hear all the time that addiction is about isolation, and the opposite of that is about connection.
Connection, yeah.
And when I practice humility, that the first part of it's kind of human. It's I'm connected to everybody else. There's a spiritual sense that I belong, not only in this room with you guys, but in the planet with everybody else. And but it took a while to get there, man. I had to bump my head a few times, and I had to experience some real disappointment and embarrassment on some 4 steps until I got where I'm at now. So I guess I throw out those, sometimes forgetting that somebody's going to be listening to this that might be new, that don't give up.
Don't give up. Yeah. So we took care of resentments, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, I think I had like 96 on my first 4 steps. A lot of them were for girls that never had sex with me.
That's not a real resentment.
No, but
it makes sense when you're new. Yeah, listen, if that's your resentment list right now and you're listening,
she never had sex with me. She never had. Or she said, "Man, you're so good looking. I wish you were taller." Shit like that. It's like, fuck you.
Yeah. By the way, none of the people sitting here are tall,
right,
so we've all got some sort of. I always talk about needing to drive a big truck because I have a Napoleon complex, so I'm probably the shortest person in the room. I know it's different because I'm a girl, but I will never be a tall, blonde hair, blue eyed supermodel. So, and I've been told that several times.
Oh, interesting.
Well, yeah. Now that we got past the being short part, what about reservations? I mean, that's for a lot of listeners. That's something that they can tune in to, like especially if they're new. So can you have that conversation?
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah, I can have it for sure. I mean, I think, you mean living within me now or in the beginning?
Both. Try the beginning first.
The beginning, I had a ton of reservations. I don't think I was much different. When I heard complete abstinence from all drugs, I thought that was fucking a huge overreaction. You know what I mean? It didn't make any sense to me because I saw my addiction as a problem with certain chemicals. I didn't see it as a spiritual, physical, mental malady at all.
Yeah. Can I ask you, did you see marijuana as a drug?
No, of course not. I didn't have a problem with it. And there's
Mother Nature.
Yeah.
It's an herb.
I didn't have a problem with it, you know, and I lied about this for a long time in recovery from the podium, and I've recently kind of straightened it out. But the true version of the story, without having to go into the long-winded lie I told for years, is that this guy was saying when we were in treatment that if you used any drugs, including alcohol and marijuana, you would go back to exactly where you were before you got here or worse. And I was with one of my peers. His name was Richard. And I was like, Richard, do you buy that shit? Do you buy that? Do you have a problem with weed? He's like, no, I don't have a problem with weed. I don't buy that at all, man. I think we'd be all right with weed. And I was like, well, maybe we should go tell him. And what I was saying was maybe you should go tell him. Because I needed to get through this treatment thing without too many bumps. And so we went up to the counselor, and my buddy said, hey, what if you don't have a problem with weed? And the guy said, you don't have a problem with weed? We both kind of shook our heads, and he goes, that's awesome. Should be super easy to stop.
Caught.
Yeah.
No
what are you going to do? What are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
Right? What are you going to do with that? And I remember reading the steps in a meeting in Starting Point before that was the name of my facility. And I read powerless. I could kind of wrap my head around that. Any step with the word God, I was going to skim past. I wasn't ready to go down that path.
Which is a lot of steps, by the way.
I know. I didn't understand what a searching fearless moral inventory was, so that didn't resonate with me too much. But I literally saw defects of character, and I believed that I didn't really have any, that I was a really, really nice guy inside, and if I just stopped using drugs, all my problems would go away.
Yeah. How'd that work out for you?
Well, I was wrong. I was wrong.
But you got an opportunity to have a lot of them be removed.
Oh, yeah. I'm the way I stand in the world today is different than the way I stood in the world a couple years ago, and a couple years before that, and a couple years before that. And I believe the basic text when it talks about unlimited spiritual growth.
Definitely.
Yeah, I do think though, honestly, when you think about, if you thought about your reservations in the beginning and you look at them now, like how drastic that difference is in our belief system in a God that we didn't want anything to do with back then. It's amazing. It's mind-blowing.
It's astonishing. And if I had to think of any reservation, I haven't been posed that question for a while when I think about, because I think, and it works on why it talks about reservations, anything you're not willing to surrender to the program, right? And for me, the way a reservation would come to life for me today would be more so, it would manifest itself in not fulfilling a commitment or like blowing somebody off because I've been through so much and I've worked, and we have worked so hard. Reservations doesn't really resonate, if that makes any sense at all.
No, it makes perfect sense. Yeah. Like, the basic terms of reservations when we first get clean is like, if my parent dies, or my kid dies, or if this happens, or if this, so a conditional reservation. And so a lot of people later in their recovery would have like a non-conditional reservation that has to do with their mental health. For me, it was mental health, like reservation about taking medication.
That was a massive, massive.
It's a hiccup for a lot of people.
Suffer point.
Yeah.
And I think, and when I look back on my process with that, I wouldn't have done it any different. It could have been a lot less painful.
Because of the understanding that you have now.
Absolutely. The understanding and experience. And I think the understanding that we have as a society, especially in Narcotics Anonymous society that we have now versus 1997.
Yeah.
For sure.
No matter what
We
club.
don't take nothing,
We don't
no,
take
matter
nothing
what.
no matter what. And, the steps can cure anything. And I bought into it, hook, line, and sinker. And I was a big believer that, oh, man, I'm glad that you found your help in therapy, but all I need is the steps. And I really believed me when I said that. And I remember my sponsor chuckling at me. And I was like, fuck you, I'm good. I'm a step working dude. And then when medication was suggested, I refused. But I was told I was diagnosed with a mood disorder and told for me to live a better, productive life, I would need therapy and medication moving forward. And I was like, I'll do the therapy, but I ain't taking no medication. And I wouldn't.
What changed for you?
My family and my sponsor did an intervention. And they said, look, we can't watch you suffer like this. The doctors, your therapist, everybody with a PhD or a lot of it is telling you medication will solve a huge amount of this suffering. And we are tired of watching you fight against the professionals. And I think the important thing was they were able to say, you are also responsible for your own recovery and your own sense of senses and how you feel. If you take the medication and it makes you feel loaded, you can talk to your doctor that you have the ability to participate in that. And they kind of empowered me. And then one day, and I'll just tell the whole story. One day I finally just surrendered that, okay, I would follow the doctor's direction. I was open to it. And I called up my sponsor to tell him that I was going to take his suggestion and the suggestion of my wife and my parents and the doctors and everybody other than me, because I'm so smart. And I got his answering machine. And then I hung up and my phone rang back immediately. And I picked it up. My sponsor's name is Ira. And I picked it up and I said, Ira. And the guy on the other end of the phone said, no, this isn't Ira. I said, who is this? And he said, well, my name is James. And when I was in my first week clean, you came and shared at a Unity Day down where I live. And after you were done, you took some time to pull me aside and talk to me, and you gave me your phone number. And I've carried it with me, and now I've been clean for a year. And I think it'd be wonderful. You were so kind to me if you would come be the main speaker at our men's spiritual retreat. And so, at the moment where I felt maybe as broken as I'd ever felt, that one more time I was going to be different, even from the people I fit in with the most. It's like a loving God, based on my belief system, showed up through James to remind me that I had value and worth. And I still had something to offer.
At that moment, you realize you got out of self. Does that click for you? Like the act of him asking you to be of service to others.
I don't know that I got out of self, but my perception of self changed.
Okay, good. Yeah, that you have worth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That interesting enough that not only did I have something to offer, but little would I ever possibly imagine how much that could turn into by openly talking about mental health and medication under the right circumstances.
Yeah. So I have a question. When you made that decision and you first started the the therapy and the medication, was there like a realization that this was the, the life raft that your higher power threw at you while you're drowning in the river? I mean, after you started all that, did you go, oh, okay, well, this is
I see that.
where I should have been?
Years later.
Years. That's interesting.
It took a long time. I was still suffering from the stigma and trying to navigate through it.
Yeah.
And it's weird, too, because I've spoke openly about it. And I say under the right circumstances, because for me, at an open meeting where there's open sharing, if I'm the first person to share about depression and medication, the whole meeting has a tendency to shift in that direction. And that's not our primary purpose. So I also want to be able to be free to talk about what's going on with me, but be respectful of the traditions of Narcotics Anonymous and the group as a whole. But when I have the podium by myself, it's a whole different story. And I've been able to see that, my favorite teacher, Sarah Blondin. I'm sure you guys are familiar
We love
with
her.
Sarah.
No, Sarah's my best friend.
She's my best friend.
She does meditations. She writes them for me.
I believe it.
And me.
But she calls me Dear One.
No, that was my name.
We're fighting words in here.
We do fight over her.
But as you guys know, and if you're listeners, please, this. I'm just gonna, since this is not a meeting, I'm gonna make an endorsement. I'm gonna throw a pitch out there for Sarah. But a lot of her message is
Sarah Blondin.
Sarah Blondin.
Yeah, you can find her on Insight Timer or usually any other meditation app that you use.
Yeah,
For sure.
but a lot of her messages is that whatever suffering we go through is our soul's experience to span to a next version of ourself. That it's a bit of I think chrysalysis or I don't know.
That's right, chrysalysis.
Chrysalysis. And she puts it in such a poetic, beautiful, natural way. And then our literature talks about that as well, where it talks about gifts that show up in terrible wrapping paper. And, recently I got a kick in the
We
mouth.
have a different name for that, by the way. So
Okay.
What is it?
it's the cunty gift.
Oh, the cunty gift. Yeah.
Wait, what?
That comes from my time in Scotland, by the way.
I want that story. What is that?
Well, so it's like, you ever make amends to somebody and then they don't own their part at all?
Yeah.
And
All the time.
there's a gift there, but it's kind of a cunty gift, right? It's like I feel free that I was able to own my part, but there's still that level of why doesn't everybody else have to own their shit too?
No,
you know what I mean?
Reciprocating amends.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have to throw
That's all right. No, hey, so if you're in Scotland, if you're in America and you're blown away by that word, just pretend like we just took a quick trip to Scotland and you'll be okay.
Because it's like their favorite word.
It's their favorite word.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question though, and this is probably around especially like mental health and did you have like fears that like in your relationships where of some kind that were like maybe preventing you from kind of moving forward to because stigma, you know what I mean, medication, like all the things that we're afraid of. Yeah, where you get like this hiccup where it's like I can't, I have this fear going on if I tell you what's really going on with me, or if I'm real about where I'm at with all of these things. How, you know what I mean? How did that affect? And it could be any relationship.
I think more than I realized.
Okay.
And I'll put that into some context if I can.
Sure.
Well, first, of course, obviously my relationship with Narcotics Anonymous, that was very much a line I had to figure out how to walk. But as far as the stigma goes, I really had come to believe, incorrectly, that I had let go of all of it.
Okay.
Because I had spoken so openly about it in Narcotics Anonymous under the right circumstances. But a couple of years ago, a dear friend of mine's daughter was interning at a place called the Steinberg Institute.
I'm familiar.
Yeah. And it's, can you explain what it is, J-Dub?
So the Steinberg Institute was founded to basically help deal with mental health issues, policy-related, government relations-related, policy issues in terms of substance use disorders, homelessness, and mental health issues to make sure that we're helping our state move forward and progress in those areas.
Thank you. She knows better.
That's really good.
And so I was asked to, during Addiction Awareness, Drug Awareness Month, there's some
September.
sort of September, some
Yes.
sort of awareness month, if I would be willing to speak about my experiences and journey through both mental health and addiction issues.
Uh-huh.
And I agreed because I wanted to serve. But this was full last name, full on-camera interview, available to the entire world.
Wow. I'm just curious really quick, did they attach you to Narcotics Anonymous?
In the written part, they sent me the draft, and it had Narcotics Anonymous, and I told them that we could not use that term, that we could only, the closest thing we could use would be a 12-step program. Cool. That was it. Because, again, I was really aware of my role as a member and what crossing a tradition line would be. So I spoke about 12 steps. And so I spoke openly about how I deal with my mental health issues and what my choices are and how I dealt with my addiction. And when I walked out of the building onto the sunlit street, as I would say in The Outsiders, I felt embarrassed. And I was shocked by that. That I realized I still had stigma.
About being an addict?
About being an addict and somebody with mental health. And I don't know which one. I think it was probably the mental health one carried, for me, much more stigma than being an addict.
Really?
Absolutely.
Wow.
So that was an eye-opener for me to just go, wow, okay, I thought I was so okay with this. And now I just felt naked and completely defenseless when I walked out of there. So I was surprised by it. But again, it's sometimes once you see something, it almost disappears.
Yeah.
Like
Put
envy.
out in the light, yeah.
Yeah.
Like envy. When you see it, poof.
Cool.
For what it really is, it goes away.
So you have some questions, right?
I do. I have one I want to ask you. Do you have any consequences, like, of past wrongdoings that, like, still affect your life today? Either using or even, in the beginning of recovery, because I feel like I did a lot of damage in the beginning when I was new.
Well, I mean, like, people still talk like, oh, when Jennifer was, first clean, there's all this, like, she had her period of chaos.
Oh, well, I did. Dan was first. You and your wife were the first, like, and a couple other people were, witnessed me growing up in Narcotics Anonymous. It wasn't graceful. But is there anything like that you look at today that you feel like you're dealing with consequences from past wrongdoings?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on. There's a lot to digest there, right? I mean, initially, I have to mark felon on any job application, but I haven't had to do that for a while. That's the simple one, right? That's the one that floats up.
That's like the common.
But I think for me, most recently, we're going to tie it back to my childhood and the fitting in and being safe, is I still develop very close relationships with women as I do with men. And I'm married. And it's becoming to a point where it's affecting my marriage and my other relationships as well. So I would say childhood stuff still circles around and hits me in the fucking mouth for sure.
Sure.
But I when it comes to like consequences like hiding or anything like that, no. And I think in the recovery process, hopefully I'm always going to discover, maybe I'll reach the point where I'm so spiritual that I don't, right? That
one could dream.
That I discover something about me that might be tied to my childhood that I have an opportunity to change.
Yeah. This is a good point, because that covers resentments and reservations. That's a good point to stop. You want to take a break?
I'd like to.
All right. We'll take a quick break and be right back. All right, well, welcome back. Break's over.
The intermission's, the intermission's over.
We're back into it.
My prostate and I appreciate that.
That's good material right there. So we covered most, we covered resentment, we covered reservations, shame, guilt, and a lot of other stuff. We're on fears now. And so tell us about one of your biggest fears in early recovery.
I thought I would be discovered as the fraud that I thought I was, probably.
What's that like?
It's exhausting to our fifth step in the basic text talks about appearing attractive and confident on the outside, while really hiding a shaky, insecure person on the inside. I still felt insecure, uncertain of myself. I didn't have the alcohol. There were things that I relied upon that worked for me for so long that were now gone. I didn't have anymore in order to feel confident or comfortable with myself or anything like that. So I think there was a constant fear that the funny thing is addicts saw right through me. I just didn't think they did.
Yeah.
What do you think was your biggest coping mechanism? And I mean, it could have been before you got clean, but I think mostly when you first get clean, of hiding those fears, even though we could see it. Like, I think for me, I was kind of, I guess feral would be the right word. So I just kind of did what I want.
Wait,
whenever
you're
I want.
still feral.
Well, I'm still a little feral, a little more responsible.
Feral
but
revisited.
Feral revisited, yes. But no, I think that the cover up for me back then was you're not the boss of me. Don't tell me what to do. Like, because I was so afraid that if I followed the path that you guys were on, that I was young. I would turn into the old fuddy-duddies that you guys were, right? And I was scared of who I was, and I didn't know who I was. And you guys seem to have your shit together, which I still don't. But like, how do you think you probably did the most? What did you think you covered up your fears with?
It's pretty easy to put my finger on that one. Is that I needed to be in the spotlight because I didn't feel like I had any light of my own.
GSR.
That's right, GSR. I got into service. I had to have the perfect pitch, tell the perfect story. I had to. I covered it up with a facade. And the interesting thing was it was so ineffective as a real coping tool, as most of them are, right? Just like we might use envy as a way to deal with, maybe not envy is not the right word. Earlier in our recovery, maybe even subject to today, depending on where you're at spiritually, talk a little smack about somebody else in order to feel a little bit better about self, but it never worked. It just made it worse.
Sure.
So, and then for the first year or so, for maybe the first couple of years, I was afraid to look at porn because it was so associated with cocaine that I thought if I looked at any adult material, I would have a freaking bag in my hand in no time. And then once I kind of reached the point where I was like, I could probably take a quick peek at this without doing any dope, and I got a level of safety away from the dope, then that was an on again, off again escape for me to just fix.
Yeah. It's common. Like for so many people, that's just one.
Oh yeah,
coping mechanism.
There's so many
Others
different
is,
ones.
reading, food,
Sure.
movies, TV, anything that takes you out of self.
Yeah.
So the stigma about like porn as being like, ooh, this super dirty thing is pretty irrelevant in the big scheme of things, because all it really is just a coping mechanism for us.
I remember a real wake-up call I had with that is, or my first glimpse into the fact that I wasn't super unique was I was 6 or 7 months clean, and I worked at an insurance office down in South Sac, and I'd walk over to Carl's Jr. and get my lunch every day because I was at the age where I could eat a cheeseburger every day and still
nothing
it
would
wouldn't affect me at all. But I have to walk by this Susie's adult bookstore one of Susie's, I think it was. And I walked by there once and I walked back and then my heart started racing and my body started kicking in like I was waiting for the connection. And fortunately, God's grace to me often is that pause between obsession and actually acting out, or thought and actually acting out. And I picked up the phone at my desk. This was pre-cell phone, and I called my sponsor. And I hit down like this. And for those of you listening, I'm kind of crunching down, covering up my ears. And I said, dude, I got to talk to you. And he goes, oh, hi, what's going on, man? What's going on? And I said, well, I just walked by this adult bookstore, man, and that was the thing I used to do, and I really, 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 really wanted to use. And I legit thought I was like alone in that perversion, other than the weirdos I would see in there in my mind. And he was like, "Oh, you too." I mean, to him it was like, "Oh, you too." It was like it was a nothing to him, and he just all of a sudden made it just more not a big deal.
It isn't. And are you saying like the perversion, as you describe it, is that what you're believing at the time or now still?
No. At the time, I got caught with porn when I was a kid, and man, did I get told
all the bad stuff,
all the shame, all the stuff. And I think if that's your jam and it's not creating a problem for you, I'm not in any judgment about it at all. I think for me, the secret of it, right, was what became too painful. Because I'm sure it would work. I'm sure it would work as a relief temporarily for any feeling I had, because it had worked for a long time. But the secret aspect of hiding it, that's where the shame came in. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a part of recovery. Did you ever read Way of the Peaceful Warrior? It's one of my favorite
Dan
books.
Millman, Socrates.
Yeah,
big time.
One of my favorites.
Yeah.
And the part of the book where they're at a restaurant and Socrates goes outside and he smokes a cigarette. And, the athlete goes out and says, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And Socrates, and I can't quote the book perfectly, but Socrates basically says, every once in a while we should enjoy, like a guilty pleasure, and not feel guilt about it. That's kind of ironic, right? Oxymoron.
Yeah.
Perhaps it is. Absolutely.
Yeah. That is.
Enjoy a guilty pleasure, but not feel guilt about it. Anyway, so that's, and I attach that, and that, for me, that takes away the stigma. Like if you watch porn, or in my case, if I play video games, and a lot of times, and this is what I've learned over years of dealing with character defects over and over on 4 steps, is that my intentions are what deems it a character defect or deems it a form of safe release.
Yeah, big time. I think that it's a very challenging line to walk. And I know that yesterday I experienced some guilty pleasures and felt zero guilt about it at all. It was like, I'm pretty strict with what I put in my body from a nutrition standpoint. I'm a big believer in body, mind, spirit. And I've got a certain goal that I'm achieving for. But yesterday we had big old bacon breakfast casserole and pies and cookies at the house. We celebrated Christmas with our family. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to eat whatever I want today. And I had some almond roca and I enjoyed it, knowing that today it would not be a part of my life.
Yeah.
That's happened. That specifically is not my case, obviously, because I enjoy food all the time, regardless of nutrition. But at certain times in my life, especially like this last year was one of the worst years I've ever experienced, with all the death. And when my sponsor died, I was so devastated that I spent 3 days playing video games, because when I would stop, I'd be on the floor, like in a fetal position, just uncontrollably crying. So I needed that as a respite from the pain.
Sure.
Absolutely. And I think, too, a lot of these things that we talk about, my friend Paul in New Orleans talks about like the 2%, right? Like we have this 98% of stuff that we all talk about as addicts. Then we have this 2% that maybe we're not comfortable talking about. And the second we talk about it, like everybody else is like, yeah, me too, or same, or they start like it kind of creates this conversation where you're like, why was I holding back on this for so, you know what I mean? Like, why wasn't I talking about this? And every time I think that I'm the only human being on the planet that is suffering for whatever ailment that I think, something secretive or whatever, I never once has somebody said, yeah, I've never, that's never been my issue. There's always some.
Let me take you to therapy right now. Come on, jump in my car.
Right, right, exactly.
Dude, the for example, the whole child molestation or sexual abuse thing, because the stigma and the shame was so heavy for us growing up, that was so taboo, and you don't talk about it.
Yep.
And many, many years ago, my friend Chad shared about being, molested as a child, and he has a term like touched out of season.
Okay.
Which, is how he describes it. And that made it okay for me to talk about it. And I shared about it at an event. I was sharing the meeting. And after that, somebody came up to me afterwards and said, me too. And then, weeks later, I hear somebody sharing about their experience at a meeting, and they said the same thing. Because of this guy that I heard, it made it okay for me to share. And so now it's so non-stigma about being sexually abused as a kid. It's like people just talk about it.
Yeah, agreed.
I think there's been a definite change in the culture, I think, in Narcotics Anonymous in general, when we're talking, where the things that were 30 years ago or 32 years ago, there was a Just for Today reading a couple days ago that literally the topic of it was depression. I think it was 2 days ago. And it was like, but it's not talking about it in the form of therapy and stuff. But like, I feel like we didn't really talk about that 30 years ago. We just didn't, And, but I think more addicts get to recover today because that stigma is slowly fading away.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because I got a text from the guy I've sponsored for many, many years, on that the other day. And he said, today your favorite meditation. And I'll show you guys. I'm going to show Jennifer this. I'm going to show Kevin. And then I'll explain myself and I might as well just go ahead and read the Just for Today.
Go to more meetings.
Yeah. Right. No, but initially it's December 28th. So if you have a Just for Today book and you're listening to this, go read it. But at the time, they kind of talked about how depression could be taken care of by certain aspects of 12-step behavior or things that are common solutions that we put in Narcotics Anonymous. And at the time, I was early in my mental health recovery, and I've known a couple of people that have taken their own life. And I think any of us that have been here for a while know that.
Absolutely.
And it even uses the word depression in the basic text under a list of character defects. And I think there's the interesting thing about this reading is there are aspects of it that are very valuable and very true. But what I just showed Kevin and Jen, everybody listening, is I have that page crossed out in my Just for Today book and the word dangerous written underneath it, because I think
it looks like an angry crossed out.
It was an angry crossed out. I felt like people's lives were being put in danger because they would read that and just think if they only worked the steps harder, if they only prayed harder, if they only called their sponsor more, that they would get better. And in some cases, I'm sure that that's true. But for those of us with serious mental disorders, that's deadly.
Correct.
And so... and I'm going to be really clear. If I'm working or anybody's working with a fully informed physician, because they have serious emotional issues or mood disorders, and they are taking medication as prescribed by that fully informed professional, they are not using.
Correct.
I'm just going to say it just as straight as I could be. So, yeah, I think we've come a long way as a fellowship, and it's still obviously a very hot button for me. But I recognize that in this reading, it talks about things that are important to keep me away from that hole.
Sure. It does, yeah. It can't provide with your physician a medication and the things that you do, and you add all of these other things into it. They play well together. And I just, to add on to what you were saying, like, we treat our addiction with 12 step, abstinence and 12-step work. Our addiction. Now, it doesn't say our mental health issues. It doesn't say our physical issues. It says our addiction. And so when I read that, and in full transparency, this book was published in 1992, right? So again, we've come a long way. Like, there are aspects of that stuff that we still didn't talk about back then. And I think today we're much more clear about, when I read about complete abstinence, it's meaning I'm not treating my addiction with a medication that changes the way that I feel. If I'm treating my depression, if I'm treating, whatever it is, if I'm having surgery and the doctor says, I'm going to give you this, I treat my addiction by going to people and saying, I'm going to take this. Here, I have a plan. This is my doctor's plan, and my doctor's fully informed about me, and I'm fully informed about my doctor. And then we're done with it, And I live by those principles. But anyways, sorry, soapbox. I'm off. Thank you. I'm very passionate about this too, because it's important that we identify the differences between treating our addiction and treating our mental health.
Yeah, and I think that there's I don't want to, because I could go down.
Yeah, I know.
So
I think I started something I didn't mean to, but I'm okay with
it. I will say that I had a guy call me up one time. I'd never met him. He'd gotten my phone number through somebody, and he wanted to talk to me because I had openly shared my experiences with mental health. And do you ever get those things where things come out of your mouth that are so wise that it wasn't you?
Yes. Yeah, I do.
That it was God.
But who said that?
And this guy called me up and he goes, how do I know the difference between when I'm in a manic episode or when I'm just acting out on a defective character? That was the question he posed me. And the answer that came out of my mouth without any thought at all was, well, bro, I don't think it matters at all as long as you're treating both.
Good one.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was deep.
And I was like, I knew that didn't come from me. That was one of those.
Thanks, HP.
That was one of those God moments where he's just like, I better show up here, okay? Because Dana can really screw this one up.
That's hilarious. I've said before, like when I share a meeting, that if you hear anything wise, it's not from me, because I've either heard it before or learned a lesson or something, right?
Yeah.
And if it sounds like bullshit and chaos, that's all me.
Yeah, amen.
For sure.
Yeah.
Amen.
For sure.
So, I love it.
So that's a big part of our lives is stuff outside of, for us with long-term recovery, is stuff outside of the obsessive compulsive behavior. My family did an intervention saying that you need to seek trauma therapy from your childhood, because this is, we're living on eggshells in this life, my kids, and so I appreciate what you've been vulnerable about and that you're able to share about it, because yes, I believe it will save somebody and it will open up somebody's ability to be authentic about that. So it's amazing and I love it. Thank you very much for doing that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think another thing I need to clarify is, for me, and this is just me personally, is I had a professional tell me, just take it as needed. And I was like, you cannot give me that kind of prescription.
Right. It needs to have hours
and it gives
and
you
time.
the choice.
You cannot put that on.
Do not exceed.
I am powerless. Okay, so I need to have a freaking give me a schedule that is very regimented, but it's because as needed. I still have an addict's brain. So, but that's just anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where we?
No, and I want to, Kevin, I want to talk real quick about or just add on to, I guess, when you're talking about your kids and the intervention and I had this really, I think with time, sometimes it's like, oh, I broke the cycle with my kids, or I did this, or I did that. And to some degree I have, but I literally 2 weeks ago had a scenario where my son had, I don't want to say a mental breakdown because that's a little dramatic, but I'm a little dramatic. And but he had a real reaction to my behavior with him and his sister. And they're adults. He's 18, and I was raising my voice, and I was very upset. And sometimes I have a tendency to get a little full of myself. Anyway, and he was like, I can't manage this. Like, I can't listen to you. And, of course, my first reaction is, well, I've done all this work and da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
And I stopped and I just said, okay, let's sit down and talk about this. And I had this revelation that just because I've done the work and just because I've done this does not mean that there's not more growth and spiritually and emotionally. I could do some work on not triggering my kids in a way that creates this reaction when I get upset with them. But it was at the same token, I still broke the cycle because I would have never said that to my parents. I would have never told my parents how they treated me affected me. I would never tell my parents, at 18 years old, what I thought about how they were handling something and how emotionally it was affecting me.
So to that point, can you imagine what their children are going to have, right?
I'm super excited,
so
actually.
The broken cycle,
it's working.
It does take time, but it is working.
Yeah.
I used to say that I was so proud of myself because I broke the cycle. I never beat my kids, never touched them.
Right.
And little did I know I was still perpetuating the emotional trauma on my kids. So, yeah, it takes time.
And as a parent, being able to say, "I hear you, I recognize that,
Exactly.
and I'm going to look at that." I've never heard that from my parents in my life. So, this is an amazing process. That's all I wanted to say. I'm done.
Dan, you talked about something coming out of your mouth that you didn't recognize, and you knew it was your higher power. So as soon as you said that, I have one instance in my life. Many years ago, I had gotten divorced, and an ex-wife, and about 2 years later, my oldest brother, who I hated as a kid and tried to kill him a couple of times.
I got that on my resume.
Yeah. He calls me up out of the blue and says, "Hey, I just want you to hear it from me. I'm dating your ex-wife. And, if you want me to stop, I'll stop. But, I'm going to get blah, blah, blah." And out of my mouth came, "I can't tell you what to do. So no matter what, you're going to do what you're going to do." So that's all I got to say.
Wow.
And in my head, I was plotting how long it would take me to get home to get my shotgun to go to his house. But that's in my head. But what came out of my mouth was not me.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to say I remember that, and I know what that feeling was. Yeah.
You feel me on that one?
I do.
Well, that's
I
good.
do.
That's another reason I'm sitting here with Kevin and JW, knowing I'm absolutely not alone. I'm with my people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
100%.
So here's probably the easiest thing for you to do right here is what assets do you have? That one, what are your assets? And then and then also the back part of that question, I know Dan's giving me this cringy look, is how does that affect you serving others? So we always, okay, I'll speak for me. I always have a hard time voicing my assets, especially in early recovery, because in early recovery, my assets were ego driven.
Mine too.
And then later, when you make that crossover out of ego and into humility, you can have false humility about, I'm nobody special. I don't look at me. I'm just nobody. And as assets today, what authentic assets can you carry?
I'll just throw out some, and there's some irony here, right? There's just so much irony. Ira and I always used to joke about the real bummer about humility is you can't brag about it when you got it, but I would say those are things that I practice, humility. I'm really pretty loving. And I think one of the biggest assets that I've been gifted with from God, because that's my belief system, is my ability to be truly interested in people. really, I truly love people. I like to learn about people. One of my path recently has been paying attention to how many sentences I say that start with me saying I.
That's interesting.
Instead of asking questions and seeking to learn. I think I've got a sense of humor.
You do.
And
It's a little warped, but yeah.
No, I love that.
No, it's great. I'm saying the facts.
That's why we've been like BFFs for 30 years.
Yeah.
I would say I certainly have integrity. I put my shopping cart back. Like, that's a thing, right?
Just to clarify that's like a personal example for you.
Yes.
Because a lot of times we voice stuff like that, and it kind of creates shame. It's got nothing to do with you. It's on them. Create shame with other people. Like, oh, if I don't put my shopping cart back, does that mean I don't have integrity? Blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe you should put your shopping cart back, but no, that doesn't have any judgment on other people. No, this is you personally.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I know that I've crossed that line before and been checked.
Yeah,
which is good. So, I think I'm pretty open to criticism unless it comes from my wife.
Me too. I don't have a husband anymore. I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, but it is so. And what's really been the most obvious for me lately has been faith.
Perfect segue. Do you want to talk about your faith?
Sure.
Yeah, because we're not in a meeting, and we kind of like to dig in and have a different variety.
Yeah,
where are you at with that?
It's been such a great journey from So, my family was Catholic. I took a first communion. But we weren't real big churchgoers, and in my early childhood, we lived in Colorado Springs. I was going to church, and this is interesting how we can form ideas from a completely immature brain and hold on to them forever. I was going to church with a neighbor kid, one of those fun churches, Certainly not the. Hey, if you have fun at Catholic church, that's okay too. But it's a tendency to be a little bit more structured. But they were having a raffle for a little miniature black and white TV. And my brother always won the TV fight, and I always heard God answers everybody's prayers. God answers your prayers. God answers everybody's prayers. And from an 8-year-old perspective, that was a literal approach that I took. And I had my raffle ticket. Every night, man, I was on my knees and I was saying prayer. I was talking to God and he was listening to me, and that black and white TV was mine. And and when I didn't win the black and white TV, I still believe that God answered everybody's prayers, just not mine. See,
that's harsh.
I think it's exemplifies the level of self that we might have as addicts. That kind of that seed that grows into to using, but. I'd always had a belief in a higher power. And then when I was really in active addiction and anybody that was in my circle was at risk. That's just all there was to it. They were at risk. I desperately tried not to believe and denied that I believed, because if there was no God, I couldn't go to hell. And then, I got to Narcotics Anonymous, and I they were pretty open about God if you're understanding, and treatment helped me out a lot. They had us draw a picture of your higher power, and I drew a circle of stick people because that's about the level of my artistic talent.
You draw excellent stick people.
I do,
yes.
But I can make stick people dance, and if you put them on those little cards and flip them, it's quite the Madonna, like Vogue thing that's going on. Anyway, I digress. And there was a sunshine, so I really just reached out to the power of Mother Nature, and the unity in the rooms was what I could work with, and that was something that I could pray to, and And then as each step progressed, and I explored more and more and openly discussed spirituality, which I thought was just such a what's that term in the beginning of the basic esoteric.
Esoteric.
Right, a very esoteric thing. And a friend gave me a book called The Tao Te Ching. And I was maybe a year clean. And I was reading this book. And by the way, I don't know exactly, but it was written about 1000 BC. That's how old this book was. Okay. That could be incorrect, but this statement is it was been around a long time. And I remember reading, and I was clearly reading parables about surrender and acceptance and compassion and love. And I got angry, and I called Ira, and I was like, bro, do you mean to tell me that these things have been around for 1,000 years before Christ and nobody bothered to teach them to me? And I legitimately was upset about it.
You thought the program invented them?
Yeah, it was weird, man. I was, well, how did my whole life I miss out on them? Not in school, not in my household. I went through addiction and I went through hell to get to them. I literally was released from the gates of hell to find these principles. So I started to take a Western or an Eastern path.
Yeah.
Which turned out to be a very Western faith system. I read a lot of red letters, which is, the Gospels. And I struggle with belief on and off again there. But I have zero doubt most of the time, because I have to say that even Mother Teresa doubted her faith every once in a while, and as a human being, I'm no different. But I believe in an omnipresent, loving God that really wants the best for me, and that everything that I go through is an opportunity for me to grow closer. And the closer I stay to God, the easier it is to navigate the emotional upheavals I have, because my nature is selfish.
Ain't that the truth?
So that belief in your higher power and where you're at with that, I don't think it's true, but I'm going to ask, do you ever believe that that's just the one true way? Or you've been in the program long enough to understand that everybody has a right to follow their own path?
Yeah, I don't... So I hear some things in meetings, and you may, and anybody listening may have said this. You guys may have said this, and I remember being in a meeting, and somebody said something that sounded so cool, and I still hear it all the time. And it's religion is for people who don't want to go to hell, and spirituality is for people who have been there and don't want to go back. And I thought that sounded really cool. And one of our most experienced, well-respected members, may he rest in peace, his name was Don Hart, stood up and said, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" In other words, there was a level of discomfort in somehow placing us.
That was God calling.
It was somehow trying to elevate our way of life through the 12 steps as superior to somebody else's path. Then again, I'm not a big believer in dogma. And I don't believe in hell either. I think, and so that's where some of my internal conflict comes in with my faith, and how I receive it if I go to a house of worship. But I know enough to know that I don't know, and I also know enough to know that nobody knows.
Right.
Okay.
I think that's fair.
I love that.
I came in with the belief system that I was going to go to hell, and with that, I already knew I was going there, so I was going to go all the way down.
I remember that story. Yeah.
I
she had the buckets.
I was circling the drain. If I'm going to hell, fuck it. Exactly. Let's go. I'll see you there.
I'm gonna take over that bitch when I get there.
Right. I'm gonna be in charge. and I appreciate the way that you kind of, like, the path that you had, because that's like, there was zero God when I got here. There could be a God. I couldn't live with myself. There was too much shame and guilt. And I knew that I would be destroyed if I believed in the God that I grew up with. Now that's changed over the years, and I don't have those same feelings anymore. But I do have the idea that there can't I don't want to say there can't be a hell. I don't know. But for me, it's not a belief system that I hold on to anymore, because it just takes me to a place that's kind of real. It's that fire and brimstone. And if you do that, it's yucky for me, right? And again, if you're Catholic and you're listening, or you're Christian, or whatever it is that your belief system is, like, I support you, and
some of our
cheering
best,
for you, man. We're cheering for you.
Yeah, some of our best friends.
Some of our best friends. But
absolutely.
But my point to that is that I am willing to go to any house, any worship, Eastern, Western. It doesn't matter to me. I can sit in a Catholic mass and enjoy the ritual and and it's very soothing for me. I can go to a gospel church and listen to music and get tears. I can go to a synagogue and revel in how the faith works, and people are so their belief system. So it doesn't really matter. I can go to a Buddhist temple. I can do all that stuff, but I didn't get there without a lot of bumps and turns and learning and whatever. Because I no longer push away the idea of God, and I no longer also put myself in a box with God, right? It can be anywhere. Yeah. I can sit on the edge of a mountain and look at the trees and be with God.
So you're saying that your belief from the very beginning evolved into what it is and changed a lot, and same with you?
Absolutely.
Same with Dan, exactly.
Yeah, and same with me.
And to kind of demonstrate in a life experience the question you just had, when my dad passed away, my mom started going back to church. And I was uncomfortable with the fact she was Catholic, or she was going to Mass. And I was uncomfortable that my 70-plus-year-old mom at the time was going to Mass by herself. And I wanted to take her. And I wanted to take the sacraments with her. But with the Catholic religion, you're to take a communion and a confirmation in order to take the sacraments, okay? And I had my first communion, but had never had a confirmation. So I went to the local parish to talk to the priest about what it would take for me to get confirmed so I could participate in my mom's faith. And what was really cool is he said, "Why do you want to come back to church, Dan?" And I told him, his name was Father Mike. He was a drunk Catholic priest.
Shocked to hear that. Sorry.
And he said, "Son, sometimes I think the rules of the Catholic Church are stupid. But when I'm in church, I feel close to God. And that's what's important. Sounds like that's what's important to you too. You won't have to come to the classes. You just show up on confirmation day and we'll get you confirmed."
Beautiful.
And I still remember my first confession. It was, you had three opportunities. It was the Easter service, and we had 3 different ways to do it. You could write down your transgressions on a piece of paper, hand them to the priest. He would glance at them, burn them, and give you absolution. You could go the old-fashioned way with the confessional booth, or you could do face-to-face. They had multiple priests there because it was a large service. And having done a couple of fifth steps, face-to-face was my choice. And I remember I sat down with this guy. He was a retired, and he had the full garb, the purple. Yeah. He had his robes going, and he had to be in his 80s. And I gave him the abridged version of my sins. And when I was done, I was the last one in there. And when I was done, he sat silently for about this long.
This is dead space when you're recording the podcast.
Right. And then he said, "Well, you pretty much ran the gamut there, didn't you, son?"
Yes, sir, I did.
Yeah.
Ran the gamut.
Yeah, I ran the gamut. And I did my Hail Marys and my Our Fathers, and I was good to go.
So you're on your way.
I was good to go, yeah.
Absolution. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. Thanks for sharing that,
Yeah.
Dan. That's
Beautiful.
good. So, like assets, that's. I love the fact that you can recognize your assets today, and they're different from what you would believe when you first did your first 4-step.
Absolutely. I think you said something that really struck home with me, that my assets were based in ego
Yeah,
in the early recovery.
absolutely.
I didn't know any other way.
I don't think most of us really do. I think we're on the so low of the low. You know what I mean? That we don't even think we have any. And then when we think we have some, they're this overinflated way to make up for all of the ways
I don't
that
know
we feel
about you
about
guys, but I
ourselves.
was pretty amazing as a newcomer. Like
I wasn't.
I could share. Man, I could share. I could share the book.
I look back now and I was like, I was talking a lot of shit out of the side of my neck.
me
Me
too.
too, man. Me
But
too.
it all sounded really good.
It's interesting. I can always gauge my spiritual condition. If I'm in a meeting and there's that, you go to the meeting fairly regularly and there's that one guy that's new that shares at every meeting, and he's got to hear himself talk. And he's talking to the newcomers when he's got 36 days, and if I'm spiritually fit, I'm all in. I'm just, because I know that I was that guy, and I'm just completely excited that he's that enthusiastic to participate. And if I'm not spiritually fit, I'm like, oh man, would you fucking sit down? Nobody wants to hear you, and it's like, wow. But I can see myself, I can observe that, which is cool. That's something I wouldn't have been able to observe. Certainly, I give the 11th step a lot of credit for a lot of that stuff.
It's cool that you acknowledge, with as much clean time as you have, that we still are fallible, and it takes one bad day, and then we're off and running. So another question is, how are you showing your gratitude today?
My favorite topic.
How am I showing my gratitude today? Oh man.
I mean, like, everybody says, like, oh, gratitude is an action word, or I believe those are opinions. A lot of people just make shit up and, they believe it's true. But that would be like a personal observation of what gratitude means to somebody personally. I just want to make that clear.
Sure. Well, the simplest answer comes to mind, and I think it's pretty universal, is I serve. I serve.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's important on how I serve. It's irrelevant. It's that I serve. I serve Narcotics Anonymous. I serve the community. I serve my family. I serve God. Even when it's inconvenient.
Yeah.
I would say especially when it's inconvenient.
Especially when it's inconvenient. But there are times when I'm like, I'm not that spiritual. But I think also, I write a 10th step every morning.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I always write is, I love you, Lord. Thank you for your grace and mercy. So I acknowledge it out loud and in writing to God and the world every single day, no matter what's going on with me. Yeah, and I think it allows for an underlying sense of thankfulness and gratitude that I have the 12-step process and my people. So when my job takes away 24% of my income, which just happened, when my wife hits me out of the blue with some feelings I didn't see coming, that there's an underlying sense of gratitude that I've got a spiritual toolkit. So I think the way I express my gratitude is by taking advantages of the tools that Narcotics Anonymous gave me.
That's perfect. And I just want to point out one thing, and maybe you don't realize this now. And you said, kind of like, as a caveat, that you said, but I'm not always spiritual, as pertaining to serving,
Correct.
right? Or being of service. I have learned that that's some of the most important service, is to be authentic in that area to other members, especially because you have so much clean time, that we are fallible. And we might look at it as a character defect and it's no good and we shouldn't share that or whatever. But I've learned when I share that authentic shit that goes on in my head at group level sometimes, that other members with not that much clean time, you know, they approach me at least and say, hey, I'm glad you shared that, man. You know, it really helps to get off of that pedestal.
Amen. I think I believe.
Yeah.
I believe that we do newcomers a massive disservice if all we do is spout shiny rainbow
bowl full of cherries.
Yeah.
There's the word that comes up a lot in some other paperwork is platitudes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important. That being said, you know, there's a catch to it, as that I'm also a big believer in sharing solution.
A hope shot.
Right? The solution of, even if the solution is I'm not getting loaded and I'm here talking about it, I'm doing much better than I'm feeling. That's one of my absolute favorite explanations of being in Narcotics Anonymous, separating doing from feeling.
Sure.
And that's in the Step Working Guides. I'm confident you guys are familiar with it, so I won't get down to it. But if you're not familiar with it...
Don't assume anything about me.
If you're not familiar with it and you're listening, I'm not going to tell you either. You're going to have to find it by working the steps.
Oh, well, there you go.
You're not helping me at all.
Well, listen, I think there was a speaker CD from years and years ago that hit me like a brick. Somebody throwing a brick at my face, and it was like, I learned how, like, the recovery process is, I learned how to feel one way and move another.
Yeah.
Right? Same thing. And I thought to myself, genius. I mean, and I don't know where he got it from, and I don't know I don't even care where it came from. But what it meant to me, like you said, is, like, even though I feel this way, it still means that I'm going to get up and I'm going to go about my life. And I'm going to talk about how I'm feeling, but it's not going to stop me from living. Right. And I think that's the crux of addiction, is once I can separate addiction and I get that connection with my higher power, I can separate that and I can do that. And I couldn't do that when I was new. Everything was based on how I felt, every single thing. And that was not good. And I think, Kevin, and I wanted to, and I'm not, it's not like I'm cross-talking or anything. But
we don't give a shit.
Well, cross-talk, man. Lay it on it. Come on.
Well, no, because gratitude is one of those places where if I don't live there, my life is very unmanageable, right? So it's a big focus for me, because I could easily get in the mess. I don't want to live there. It's not fun anymore. It used to be like a wild ride. Yeah, let's
chaos,
do it.
yeah.
Yeah, and still sometimes I go there. But what happens for me is that when I'm feeling grateful about your presence in my life, and when I'm feeling grateful about I love my job or I love my kids or whatever, like for me, I can feel grateful, but living in gratitude is something where I have to outwardly show you that, because I can say to you all day long, I feel great for you, and then smack you across the face and tell you what an asshole you are. And you're like, I don't understand how this works. And so my gratitude really shows people that I mean it when I say it. And I think that is where I live, is that I don't always show people my gratitude, and often I feel that. And so I try more to do the outward expression of it, which is, you know, like we've all got love languages. And I mean, if we really want to go down that road, you know, like my love language is I'm going to, you know, make cookies for my home
we
group.
cook for you, and I cook for people.
We cook for people, and that's how I show my love. Or I do something for you. I show up for you. I get on the phone with you and have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
It's about you and not me. But I think it's so important to identify for me, like if I'm really in gratitude, you're going to know it. And if I'm not, then you're feeling like, what's going on with this lady, you know?
So your gratitude is an action word for you.
It is for me.
That's the point, yeah.
And I think the point for that is that, like, we all have different ways of absorbing and acting in ways of gratitude, or feeling in ways of gratitude. But for me, it's just who I am as a person. Like, if I'm not outwardly showing it to you, then it's hard for me to act in that, or to get to that place where I don't want to bitch about everything.
Yeah. And I think we've recognized gratitude as an incredibly valuable tool
Well, it gets me out of my own bullshit.
Yeah.
Really,
Well,
I mean,
and I
that's
think,
at the end of the day.
Even going to the mental hospital, going to jail clean, being diagnosed with cancer, all of these things are my experiences. Having a father die of Alzheimer's disease, there are some things outwardly that would appear like, oh my God, I'm so sorry for you. That's terrible. And they are, not to minimize the pain that we go through or the loss of your sponsor, but like, is there anything of that experience that we can eventually rest in thankfulness for? And for me, the answer has been 100% yes. And so the spiritual path that I hope we're all on is trying to find that gift a little bit sooner in the process.
Sure.
And I also have to acknowledge that with severe mood disorders like I suffer from, even with taking medication because I take very small amounts, there are times in my life, although they're much fewer and much more far between, where I cannot tap into any of it.
Sure.
I cannot tap into any love. The level of apathy is so immense that people that don't experience just can't understand it.
Sure.
And that's why, I understand why people take their life.
Right.
That's a hard one.
For me.
And again, we went right from gratitude to like the darkest spot ever. But have I been able to serve God because I experienced this on a bigger level than I could ever imagine?
Yeah.
Sure.
I brought up that whole distinction about gratitude because it's, I have experienced different types of gratitude and I have a lot of action gratitude. I'm not saying anything against it. But the other type of gratitude is parts where I'm unable to be in action because of the pain I'm in.
Sure.
To show gratitude. So that part is, and this has been recent, right? We've had, multiple people pass away, and I've been in an extreme amount of pain, and the people in my circle have gathered around me and been there for me, and they have been the action. They took action, and my gratitude was telling them in between the tears and the pain and the sobbing that I am grateful for them. So just acknowledging. So there are different shades of gratitude.
Agreed.
No, that's nice. I like that multiple perspectives because, I've got some people that are newer in my life that don't understand mental illness. And one of them, God bless him, showed up at my house when I made it very clear I was not going to participate in life that day. And people that know me know just to send me a text and leave me the hell alone. And then I have a process to work through. I'll find my momentum. And the guy showed up at my house and wanted to come in and open up all the shades. And he found himself meeting a Dan he was not ready for. But there's a deep thankfulness that he did that because I know it was out of nothing but love and concern. And, and just, I had to have a conversation about, man, I love you. I know you love me. I know that my behavior maybe not have reflected it at that moment, but that was what I was capable of.
That's all I had.
So you understand.
Yeah.
I do think, though, all these experiences make us this conduit for the next person. It's like we have these experiences and then we pass it, and it's like it's this, I don't want to say legacy because it's not from ego, but like I think when we have these experiences and we share them and we pass them off to the next person that's struggling, I feel like my sponsor has gone through all of the thing and a real life experience. Like my mom was just diagnosed with moderate dementia. And my sponsor's mom had dementia. And then you know what I mean? And my sponsor has dealt with all of these other things, life experiences that I haven't. And she gets to be that conduit. And then and then I pass that on to somebody I'm working with or somebody that just reaches out and says, I heard you went through this.
Yeah.
And that's the whole gift. This is a whole... I don't want to make it seem like a big deal. Again, I'm being dramatic. But it's like, that's the whole process here, right? Like that is how we stay connected and we keep that connection and addiction doesn't run rampant,
You just talked about the therapeutic value, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It is a big deal, Jen. I think it is a big deal. It's like the deal, right?
Right.
therapeutic value of
The
one
therapeutic
addict, yeah.
value was without parallel, right?
Yeah.
Like that is the crux of.
But I understand what you're saying. The evolution, right, of change.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, how often do you go to a meeting and you hear somebody saying, "Work the steps or die, motherfuckers"?
You haven't heard that in years, other than us laughing about what we used to hear when we got here, right?
Yeah.
And I think we are all probably very on the similar page of this. Is that a softer, gentler Narcotics and more loving, compassionate Narcotics Anonymous is not a bad thing. It's a good thing, man. It's a good thing.
I feel it's more attractive.
Yeah,
Sure.
And that doesn't mean we stop telling the truth, but
How we deliver that information.
that doesn't
is
mean we
important.
stop. And I know that there are old timers out there that have their opinions and are entrenched.
We are. Aren't we the old timers at this? I hate that term, but I'm saying
Oh
it.
yeah. Or entrenched in
true.
More
entrenched
serious member.
in certain things. But I think just like I struggled when we started coming out with all this new literature. I don't know if anybody else did, right? I mean, I was like the basic text and it works how and why. That's good. The other fellowship doesn't have 400 books, you know what I mean? I went down, and then I was
opinion,
and ego. And the first time I read Living Clean, I was like, this is nice, cute bumper sticker knowledge here.
What?
And that's the first time. The second time through it, I started to realize how incredibly powerful and needed that literature was. It just took me a while.
That book is my favorite book.
I go to a virtual meeting very regularly, and it's a literature meeting, and the person who shares the meeting gets to pick their own literature. And there's a significant amount of clean time at this meeting. Like my clean time, I would say, is about average. And almost, I'd say 8 out of 10 people pick something from Living Clean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a pretty powerful book.
Don't blame them. All right, so we're at the point in the podcast where we want to hear like this filthy, dirty, fun, crazy, insane story. It could be from clean, but getting loaded is even better. Like what?
Just to go out with it. Well, I started it with a banger, and we end with a bang, right?
Yeah, well, guys, you know what I mean? There's probably 2. Did I tell 2?
Yes.
Okay.
Love it.
So the first one, I don't know how dirty or nasty or rotten it is, but I've told it for years, and it's a true story. Is that I was in high school, and I got invited to a party, and there was a girl there I liked, and I knew how to arm myself. I armed myself with a bag of dope and a bottle of whiskey, and I went to that party, man, and I got blind. Full ass blackout. Okay. Don't have a goddamn clue what happened. And then I had to go to school the next school day and walk in looking cool, being Mr. Cool, knowing everybody else knew what I did, but not knowing what I did. No idea what I'd done.
You didn't have any friends or anything you can call and ask?
I was mortified. I couldn't even pretend like because that blacking out is just not cool, man.
Yeah.
A complete blackout is just not cool. So I walked into school, and the girl that threw the party came up to me, and she said, "Dan, did you have a good time at my party?" And I said, "Sue, I had a wonderful time at your party." And I was just turning on the inside. And she said, "Do you remember when my mom and dad came home?" And I was like, "No, I don't remember. I'm pretty sure I'd left by then." And she said, "Oh, no, Dan, you hadn't left. They came into the house. They looked around. They were a little bit stunned by the party. Then they looked at you. And they pulled me into the kitchen. And they pulled me aside. And they said, 'Honey, we're so proud that you invited that little retarded boy here to your party to share it with everybody else.'" And they pointed it at me. And I was devastated. I mean, do you want to talk about humiliation? They legitimately thought I got hit by Down syndrome. That's how fucked up I was. The embarrassment, the level of, but the weird thing was I can remember my thought process immediately after that. It was, I got to quit.
And you were in high
alcohol
school.
and weed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mixing
I
alcohol
had
and
to quit
weed.
the combination. So to me, that's a story that screams of addiction. It screams of the internal
Hey,
consequences.
did you still have your clothes on?
Yeah.
All right.
In these stories, I never did. But
I mean, there is a lot of.
I mean, there's so many of humiliating stories. I got accosted and assaulted by a homeless guy because I was trying to get cigarettes off of him at the end of Bridgeway Street in Sausalito after escaping from a detox I was thrown into. I got stories like that. You know what I mean? It's like I got stories where the cops pitied me so much they took me to detox instead of jail, and then I ran out anyway. But I want to talk about, on the way up here, I told you guys that it was a nostalgic trip, and we were going to talk about
Yeah, that's right.
what it was. And I said, I almost lost my life in recovery. So bear with me. So I'm early in recovery, hyped up on service, doing the world a favor. I'm going to this party at my first work. I'm a little nervous because there's people that are going to be drinking there, but I feel like I'm on good spiritual ground. And I walk past this guy, and he's struggling to get a stereo out of the back of his truck. His name was Dwayne. And I was like, can I help you? Total stranger. And he's like, yeah, man, that'd be great. I would love it if you would help me. And so I started helping him undo his truck because he was moving into this apartment. And he either noticed a key tag or I mentioned Narcotics Anonymous. And he goes, you go to Narcotics Anonymous? He goes, man, I used to go there. I used to be clean for 3.5 years. I keep thinking about going back, but I can't get a day clean, man. I can't get a day clean. And I asked him to meet me at a meeting the following day. And he did.
Wow.
And it turned out that he was my sponsor's first sponsor. Okay.
Holy cow.
And then he went back to NA, struggled with relapses, and then he decided to check himself into Progress House up here in Coloma.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And he called me up one day and said, hey, Dan, you want to go rafting with me and a couple of my buddies? I was like, fuck yeah, let's go rafting. Clean, man. We're going to do it clean. So I drove my little 68 VW bus up there, got out, said, I got to, where are we going to get the rafting equipment there? We got it right here. Okay. They had one of these Kmart rafts. All right.
Oh, shit.
That they had bought or stolen from it was not built for the upper American River. All right. We had 2 wooden paddles, and the life vests we had weren't real life vests. They were like water ski half life vests.
Yeah.
And we decided to raft the upper American. So anybody that's not familiar with California, the upper American is like level 4 whitewater rafting. Okay.
Yeah,
it's professional
shit.
guide kind of shit. And
And you got a floaty.
we put the raft in that we got at fucking Walmart or Kmart or whatever. And of course, we hit the first major rapid, and I was launched out of the boat into the rapids. My back hit the middle of a rock. I started getting sucked under. And almost out of a miracle, Dwayne was able to grab the back of my collar and pull me out of the water. By the end, the bottom was ripped out of the bottom of the raft was gone. We had a half full tube. All of our oars were gone. All we did was hold on to the tube and try to kick our way to shore. But we finally made it all the way to the Salmon Falls Bridge. But that was my story of being clean, and I did that with Dwayne. And unfortunately, Dwayne died at 27 years old with a needle in his arm and never got to raft again. But
He never made it.
I have fond memories of my time with him.
Fun memories of near death.
Yeah, but it makes a great story, though,
Yeah.
doesn't it, man?
Yeah.
Near-death stories, yes.
We
So-
have those.
So yeah, those are a couple stories. We could probably spend another hour swapping stories, but I feel pretty emotionally tired. How are you guys doing?
Yeah. Yeah, well, we really appreciate you coming out today. And it's a great way to end season 1. That's another thing. Like, we're starting season 2 next year, and you're kind of like, a very special place in my heart.
Thank you.
That you're helping us close out season 1.
Me too. I don't think it's any coincidence that Josh, as much as I'd like to meet him and spend time with them, that J-Dub was here. I believe that was orchestrated by a loving God, and I'm incredibly thankful for you guys in my life, as well as this process that we have, and we can share so openly with one another. It's amazing.
I would not be sitting on this couch today if it wasn't for you and your wife. And I need you to know that. Thank you. I love you.
Yeah.
Me too.
And almost 9 years ago or whatever, how long it was since I moved up here, I met Dan before I moved, and at a convention, and we have people in shared people that we love in common, and I was introduced to him, and we got to know each other a little bit, and so when we were planning on moving up here, Jen and I called Dan and I go, hey, I need to get plugged in up there. We're moving. And he's like, great. And I go, yeah, well, so what's your home group? And he goes, well, I go to this one meeting and I'm not sure that it's for you though, but I sit in front and I try to pay attention. He goes, it's a little chaotic.
It's called Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, because it's a little chaotic. And I don't know if you knew at the time, like where I was at, that I don't want anything chaos in my life, right? I started my spiritual journey in peace, right? And cause no harm. And so I show up at his home group, and it is just like the meetings when I was new. Right. It reminds me, this is like 30 years later, there's meetings that are still like, and I walk in there and there's like people fucking, full voice talking during the share, halfway through the shares, the guys in the back get up and start their Harley and just let it rev there, for like a couple of minutes and then drive away. And the atmosphere, I was like shocked. I was shocked. I was like, okay, you're right, Dan. This is not for me. I think I went a couple more times to see if it was different.
That was my home group for a long time.
Yeah. And then just connecting with you after that and finding our spiritual paths are aligned together. Super grateful that you made that phone call to me and said, hey, you want to get involved in this journey within. And so.
Can I tell a funny Dan story real quick and then we can?
All right, yeah.
Okay. Oh, shit.
So, like I said earlier, I was new and I would show up at their house a lot in their little apartment. And, we didn't have cell phones and all that shit back then. So you weren't texting people and saying, like, I was just showing up. So I drove to their house on some night, probably again about some boy I was upset about because that's how I rolled back then. And you know the story I'm going to tell. And so Ruth lets me in and we're sitting there talking or whatever. And she yells something like, and my nickname back then was Fluff. So I think she yelled back to Dan, who was in the bedroom, Fluff's here or whatever. And I don't know if she told you I was upset. I don't even know what happened. But the end of that ended up with Dan running out. We were playing You Give Me Fever by Joe Cocker. And he runs out and he swears it's not in a towel, but he was wrapped up in a towel with a hairbrush and jumps on the coffee table in the
like
living room
business?
And singing, yeah, You Give Me Fever to both of us on the couch.
Aww.
Took me totally out of myself, exactly what I needed. And in true Jan form, yes, there are many of those funny stories, but that's probably my most favorite one. And I think we laughed until we cried for like a solid half an hour. We could not help ourselves. So anyway.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Love you guys. Thanks again.
All right, everyone. Appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. Often you will hear addicts referring to a specific 12-step program or rehab. These are personal stories. We do not represent any of the programs.